Okay, cool. We're going to attempt to do lesson 10. So now we're getting a little deeper into React. Today we're actually going to do some CRUD operations with React. Now I say we're going to do CRUD operations with React, but we're actually not doing the CRUD with React itself. We're using React to facilitate CRUD commands off to our endpoint. So the node server is going to do all of the actual CRUD itself, but React will call those endpoints. So as I was going through this over the weekend, it took me a little bit to put this together, mostly because hooks are new to React. They were released in 16.08, so they're very new to me. I'm just brand new to hooks, but it is the way that we should go because when you guys leave school, hooks are something you're going to see quite a bit of as you head into the wild. Class component structures are very simple. Hooks are a little bit more complex. So I feel your time is best spent learning hooks over learning class components. All right. So because of that, it took me a little bit to work the lesson together so that we were utilizing hooks and that you guys get like the most up-to-date kind of lesson. All right. So at this point, we have created the React app, or did we? Yeah, we did. We created the React app. I don't know why this is not on the correct lesson. There we go. However, last week we used something called the hook router, and that turned out to be not a good idea. So when we actually facilitate calling out towards our endpoint, the way we're doing is we're proxying our commands. What a proxy is it's when you send information to another service, and then that service will send that information off to another endpoint and run it and send you back the response. So out of curiosity, how many of you use a VPN? A couple of you? Just a few of you? So that's what a VPN is. A VPN is a proxy. Basically what happens is your computer network sends out a request to the internet. Your VPN picks up that request and actually delivers it to the internet. So it appears as though it's coming from them and their IP address. They get the response back, they cache the response, and then send you back the cached response. That's how a proxy works. We're going to kind of do the same idea. Basically what's going to happen is any route that we don't have defined in our React application will be picked up by the proxy, and the proxy will proxy it to our node application. So anything we're going to send off to our API, so to speak, will be picked up by React and transferred back to us. Hook router didn't understand that. And it didn't seem to matter what I did to try to get hook router to understand it, it wouldn't. It just kept hijacking the paths. Every single time I try a new path, it hijacked the path. So because of that, we're going to switch to a more common router library called React Router. It's not hard for us to implement, but we're going to have to remove the hook router from our current blogging platform and implement React Router, which might work out to our benefit because hook router was a little bit more confusing, I think, for most people. React Router is a bit straightforward. So it should actually work out in our favor. So that's going to actually be our first step, is refactoring our routing logic. It's getting warm in here already. Refactoring our routing logic in React. And then after that, we're going to move on to, that's going to take a little while actually to put in. After that, we'll be doing the setup for the React.js to Node.js API. Now, this is written as week 10. We're taking this at the pace that it takes us. Okay, so if we don't complete this lesson this week, it's not a big deal. We'll complete it next week. These two CRUD lessons that I have booked for this week and next week, if they take 3 weeks, they take 3 weeks. That's fine, because the authentication logic we're going to accomplish during that time as well, and I originally had a dedicated class for the authentication logic. However, I want to be able to deploy at some point to Heroku, and I don't want you guys having unauthenticated apps on Heroku. It's not very fair to you. You're going to wind up with a ton of crap in your database that you don't want. So because of that, we're going to also talk about authentication today. We might only get the routing done and the authentication done, and we might have to start the CRUD operations next week. That's all there is to it. But nice and slow, right? That way we fully understand what we're doing. Okay, cool. Any questions about React before I start that you may have thought about over the week? No? All right. So I will release Lab 3 probably when we take our first break. I'll write it up real fast. It's going to be super simple. Basically, all we're going to do is you guys are going to add components for the About and Contact and actually create some information on your About and Contact page so they're not blank like they are currently. So that will be Lab 3, but I'll post that at the break. So, all right, cool. I want to get into React Router, but we'll wait for Barry to sit down and get his computer out because I don't want him to fall behind. And it probably wouldn't hurt to open up this lesson plan. It's just click the Lesson 10 lesson plan so you have it open as well. And it's the React CRUD Part 1. And there will be a quiz, but I'll post it later. But I'll give you an extra week to complete it. Actually, I'll probably just leave it open, and you'll just complete it at your leisure. Incidentally, take those quizzes. Makes doing your final exam much easier. much easier. All right, so incidentally, if you are behind and you need the current version of the blog, I did post it into Blackboard. You can download it. What I would do is extract it directly to that directory and let it overwrite your files currently in that directory. It won't overwrite your .env, and it won't overwrite, what's the other thing I'm thinking of? It won't overwrite the .env, and it won't overwrite any of your Git or anything. Those will all stay in place because I removed those. If you do that, you will need to run npm install in both the app directory and the client directory in order to get all the node modules that you will need. Okay? So just keep that in mind. All right. Where are we at, Barry? Are we live? Awesome. So why don't we open up Visual Studio Code. Go to File and Open, and we'll open our project in here. So you guys are Monday. Nope, not that one. I need the other Monday. There we go. Cool. And let's review quickly what we did last week. So last week we installed React, just our basic version of React. We didn't get into actually adding in any CRUD operations, but we did install it as a dependency inside our client. So I'm going to just navigate there inside my terminal into our node application, and I'm going to cd into the client directory, and I'm just going to run yarn start or npm start if you don't have yarn. It's going to boot up our little server. And if everything is still good, you should see this page, but now this is React. The About, Contact, and Home pages all happen instantaneously. There's no actual HTTP request being made outside of the React app anymore. It is now officially a single page application, or an SPA. Okay. The thing is, though, is we're running this without our node server. We're doing this because we're not actually pulling any data from the node server anyways. Like I said before, we're going to use our node server as an API endpoint. So when we want to actually retrieve blogs, we'll need to read them from the node server. When we want to create a blog, we'll need to pass that information to the node server. That means that we're also going to wind up having to authenticate ourselves against the node server. We only need to authenticate destructive things, right? So if we're going to create a blog, then we need to authenticate. If we're going to update a blog, we need to authenticate, or destroy a blog, we need to authenticate. So for those three pieces, we'll need to authenticate. However, we're going to make blogs public, because obviously what's the point in having a blog if you can't view it from the public? So we're going to make blogs public. So that means that our actual index reading operation will be publicly exposed, which is super cool. And we'll probably write that one first because it's the simplest of the ones to write. But before we do that, we're going to need to refactor our React router. Our React routing right now is being handled by our hook router. The only issue there is that if it's a path that hook router doesn't know, so if I go to /Humphrey, for example, it still works and it's still navigating. And what's happening is hook router is actually returning null in the background. What should happen when we have the node setup complete, it should navigate off to the node server, and the node server should pick it up and attempt to try to render that path or do something with that path. And then if it doesn't work, we should get back null or path doesn't exist or something. However, hook router doesn't seem to want to allow that. It keeps hijacking the request regardless of what I tried to do. So we're going to refactor over to React router, which is probably arguably more commonly used anyways. But it won't do this. It won't cause hijacking on us. It would actually come back and tell us this path does not exist. So that's what we're going to do first. So make sure you have your code opened up inside your IDE. And we're going to have our client directory open here, right, on the left-hand side. Now, I've got the whole blog project open, so you're going to see assets, the controllers, the models, everything. But we're only going to work inside this client directory currently. So step one for us is to actually install React Router DOM, but we need to install it in the client directory. So make sure in your terminal you're in the client directory. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see this. And installing can be done in two different ways. You can either do yarn add or npm install, okay, depending on which one you're using. If you're using yarn, it looks like this: yarn add React Router DOM. And if you're using npm install, just replace yarn add with npm install, and then still React Router DOM. Once you have that in there, go ahead and hit enter, and it's going ahead and installing the React Router DOM for us. So React Router, just like the hook router, provides us a way to navigate our application by identifying the URL path that the user has typed into the address bar, right? It basically takes that path, associates it with a component that we've defined, and will automatically render that component back. Works exactly the same way as hook router, just with one nice little added feature, which is if it doesn't know the path, it doesn't automatically try to assume it knows the path, right? It lets it just kind of go off where it needs to go, and it winds up getting proxied out. All right, so in order to add the React Router to our application, we're going to have to change some files. And I know this process is always kind of tedious, and I apologize. Inside our IDE here, let's go to source. And we want the index.js file, so open up the index.js file. Okay. And in here, we're going to add our first part. So right now, our app just kind of free floats. The way React Router DOM works is we actually wrap the application with something called Browser Router, which is just another component. What that will do is it will intercept any path information coming in and then deal with it using the React Router. So we're going to have to wrap our app with that. So let's put these pieces in place. The first piece we're going to need is to import the Browser Router. And this is kind of a new looking piece of syntax. We use a set of curly braces. We type in the module that we want to import. And then we tell it where we want it to come from. Okay. So what this means is instead of importing the whole library of React Router DOM, we're only importing the Browser Router module from it. And that's a JavaScript thing, not a React thing. Once we have the Browser Router in place, why don't we clean this up? I'm going to move this to the next line. Move that guy down one line. Put that over here. The reason I'm doing that is because we're going to wrap the app with the Browser Router. I'm just going to take this guy and put it right in the middle of it. There we go. Can you guys see that okay? Back there, C-Trim, can you see that okay? Okay. Tuna, good? All right. I like to have lots of real estate. I don't have to zoom in too far if I don't have to. So once again, the Browser Router is going to wind up taking in the request. and then dealing with the request, right? So whatever path they've typed in, it's going to deal with it. It's going to pass it into React Router, and then React Router will render whatever route, matches. If none of them match, then it's going to send that off to wherever it needs to go. So obviously, now that we have the browser router listener, we also need to actually create some routes. So we're going to refactor the routes that we created last week so that we're actually using React Router for them instead. This component we're going to create is literally the same as the hook router component. It's only just listing the routes. It's not actually creating any links for us or anything like that. It's just encompassing the routes that we're going to wind up using in our application. Is anybody still typing before I move on? All good? Cynthia, good? Awesome. Okay. So let's go to components and open up router.js, but I want to rename this. I had a student last week say it doesn't really make sense. It would make more sense if it was called routes.js, and I kind of agree. So we're going to rename it to routes.js. So just take the R off, add an S, hit enter. If it asks you to update the imports, just say yes. It will actually go through, and any place you've referenced that file, it will update them. So it's kind of handy. All right, so right now we have home, about, and contact. We're actually going to wind up needing a few more routes than just those three. But let's take this nice and slow, right? Let's not add in everything we don't need yet. So this piece right here where we have const routes, this is the piece that we're going to remove. That's the piece that we were adding in for hook router. So we're going to get rid of that. And we're going to instead replace it with function routes. And then we're going to make sure we export routes with a capital R. I'm going to just put some distance between our import React and our home and about. And right underneath the import React, we're going to import two more modules from the React router DOM. They are called route and switch. Switch is just like a switch statement in any programming language that you can think of. Basically, the idea is that the path is kind of like your case variable that's getting matched, right? So path would be the thing that's being evaluated, and then the logic will be the component that we return. But it essentially is a switch. That's why they call it switch. All right, so let's add in the actual switch logic. So that's going to go inside our function. So first we need a return. So let's write the return statement first. Let's transfer that closing parentheses and curly brace to the next line. The component is switch with a capital S. And then in here is where our case statements would go, but they're not called case. They are called route. And that is a self-closing component. So it has that slash bracket. Are you waiting on me? Okay. Taking it super slow. All right. The first piece that we're going to provide to it is the path that we want to evaluate. There's a few different options that we have, but we're going to use exact path. Exact basically means exactly what you think it means. It means there's no fuzzy matching here. This has to match exactly in order for it to work. So we're going to do exact path equals, so it's an attribute, slash, or a property, we would say. So we're going to match the slash path. Slash, slash. Wee. And then if that path matches, we're going to render the home component. I don't know why it doesn't put the nice little spaces. I like the nice, oh, you see, I even tried to put them in and it just pulls them back again. Doesn't give me the option. I like it when it spaces them out a little bit. Can't have everything, I guess. Let's be lazy little programmers and duplicate that twice. The next path will be the about route. I like it when things rhyme accidentally. And then the last path will be the contact. So as I said, these are not links. These are just routes. They're routes pointing to our components, right? So when we actually have, if somebody types in the slash, then it will route to home. If somebody touches in about, it will route to about. And if somebody types in contact, it will route to contact. Or if we have links, right? Which leads us to our next bit. We need to actually go and update all our links so they correspond with these new routes. Where are our links located? Does anybody remember? Main nav, that's right. Make sure you open the right one. You want the one that's under components and partials, not the one in the Node app. So right now we still have a little bit of a stray hanging around from hook router. We're actually going to remove that, but why don't we just change it? We're going to change it from A to link and from hook router to React router DOM. Link essentially works kind of the same way as hook router's A does. It will actually take your component, it will cache it if it's already been rendered once before, if there's no changes, and then it will deliver that as the rendered content. So it's super fast. This is what allows us our single page application to be nice and quick and move quickly, but also not to change requests, right? So that link stops any requests from going off to the server and anywhere else, providing it matches. So everything pretty much stays the way it is, except for the UL stuff. So all this LI stuff is going to change. So it's not even really that drastic. It's this A tag, so right here, this capital A is going to become link. And obviously the closing tag will also become link. And then the href is going to become 2. And that is literally it. So you can go ahead and take all those capital A's and make them link. And make those hrefs 2. And then that's it. I'll add some space so it's a little bit more human readable. Pretty easy, eh? So our last bit will be a small change that we're going to make in app.js. In app.js, we obviously need to include these routes, right, so that they're available. We don't need to include the main nav because it's already included. Why is that doing that? Oh, my page or my screen kept dimming. It's because my iPad was sitting on the cord, and every so often it would disconnect. All right, I'm good. Anybody still typing before I move over to app.js? No? Okay, let's jump over to app.js. So right now we have this route result. We're going to get rid of the route result part. And we're going to embed our routes in here. Like so. So you remember, this is not a component that's rendering any actual view. You're not getting anything visibly from this thing. All you're getting is those routes nicely defined for us. The main nav will be the thing that renders, and then after that, it's going to render the actual content after whatever is after app. That gets rendered next. So it's kind of nice. It works. It surprisingly works really, really well. We should be able to boot up the server. Oh, we want to get rid of hook router under app.js. Yes. Yeah, you go away. Sorry, you are completely right. And we need to import routes with a capital R. There we go. That's better. Thank you. Nice catch. Oh, we also need to get rid of this const route result. There. Now it's gone. We have purged. It's been the big purge. All right. Let's do a render. Oh, okay. Got to start it. Yarn. Start. Off we go. Logging project. See, there's home. Nice. About. Contact. All of it works. Let's just check to see if we're doing any actual requests on the network. About. Contact. See, no new network requests. Home. Single page application. Cool. So React Router actually has some more intricate pieces to it that we can actually put in. We can do some really complex stuff with React Router, and we will be as we go on, especially when we want to show like a specific page and stuff like that. We have to modify our React Routers so that we can offer bound parameters, just the same as we did in Node, but we'll get to that later on. For now, that's it for the React Router piece. Any questions about React Router? No? All right. It's not that far from hook router. It's basically similar. It's just how it works behind the scenes is going to work better for us. That's really the idea behind this. All right, cool. Is anybody's application not working, out of curiosity? Ali's is not working. All right. Let's just do one more change, and then we'll take a small break, and I'll take a look at your app. Let's open up our client package.json file. Okay. And at the very bottom of this file, right down here, we're going to put a comma, and we're going to define a proxy. This is what's going to happen is when a path does not get matched by the React router, it will attempt to send that path off to the proxy. So we're going to say proxy http://localhost:4000. So just so you're aware, this is purely for development purposes only. This has nothing to do with Heroku. Heroku's not even going to pay attention to this. It's going to ignore it. The reason why we're doing it is because we're running Node.js and we're running the React server at the same time, and we're going to facilitate all of our stuff between those two. And we need to be able to test our paths, test our CRUD operations, our API endpoints, and make sure everything is working. This proxy is allowing us to do that. Some people will deploy this way so that we actually proxy our React through it. We're going to do it more efficiently and build our React so that it's completely built and let Node deliver it, right? So that we'll have a lot more optimization, a lot more efficiency with our React application. But for this purpose, we need this. Otherwise, we can't develop because it won't be able to funnel the request to the appropriate location when we try to do API endpoint checks. So we need that proxy piece in there. Make sure you add the comma, otherwise it will break. And then the last piece, we need to open up /app.js, not under the client, but the one that's actually in our blog. This great big massive file with your MongoDB stuff and everything else. Once you have that open, let's scroll all the way to the very bottom. Step 1, see all this wonderful view logic that we wrote? Highlight all that wonderful view logic that you wrote. Find your delete key on your keyboard and hit the delete key. Bye, view logic. We are going API only. Node server does not need to know about views or care about views. That's actually not 100% accurate. It's just its views are not going to be pug anymore or HTML. They're going to be JSON. That's how it's going to respond from here on. The next thing, you see how we have this routes? We're actually going to just modify this route slightly. And the way we built this has made this so nice and clean. Because if we want to change it so that all our routes are /API/blog/API/authors, all we have to do is modify this one route, this one piece, and call it API. Something is wrong with this code. And it is getting mighty hot. And not in a good way. My God, that's warm. All right, so there's our API. And then we need to set up something. So we're going to set up a handler. This really isn't necessary at this step, but we're going to set it up at this step. It's not going to become active till we actually do our build and deploy to Heroku, but we'll put it into place just so it's there. So this will be handles any requests that don't match the ones above. This is kind of unique. This is kind of funny. I'll explain this in a second. So it's going to be get wildcard. Pass that off to the request and response. And that's going to respond with a send file path.join. That is 2 underscores, dir name, plus /client/build/index.html. All right. While you're typing, I'll explain what's happening. Okay, so currently that proxy that we put into place, if the React application doesn't know what the hell we're talking about with the path, so say the user goes to /API/blogs, what will happen is the React will interpret that and go, oh, I don't know what this is. React Router doesn't know what this is. So I'm just going to pass this off to the node server. And I'm going to pass it off to that specific address that you told me where it is, which is localhost 4000. So it will proxy that request, which means it's not going to handle the request. It's going to pass it off to another server to handle that request, that request. When that server has a response, it's going to send the response back to the React server and back to us. We only do that for the development side. We only care about that for the development side. The reverse happens once you deploy it. Node is now the listener. It's the thing that's listening for any incoming request. If it doesn't match our API requests, it's going to pass them to our React server. And it's going to attempt to try to figure out whether or not React can handle that. If React can handle it, it's going to send its response back to the node server. So in development, it works from React to Node, but in production, it works from Node to React. Okay, little confusing. I can understand, but just keep that in mind. All right, why don't we take a small break for that to kind of all sink in, and I will help get anybody whose application is not working, and then we'll work on adding JWT to our application. Our next step is going to be to implement the actual authentication. So whenever you do API requests, I'm not sure, how many of you have actually worked with APIs before? Like an authenticated API? None of you, really? Like no Facebook, no Twitter, not even Google Maps? Nothing?
I've done a bit.
A little bit with Google Maps?
Yeah.
Did you have to register an API key? And a secret?
An API key.
Okay.
I also learned how the whole sending Google Maps is free.
Oh, the OAuth piece?
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
That was a nightmare.
So you have two?
I use Authentication, but I just tried it with
The public endpoint?
Postman.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So I tried it in the backend for it because it will give you,
Right.
React web.
Did you still have to register for an application key?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that tends to be the common principles around APIs. So APIs have different ways to authenticate. The most common, I would say, is OAuth. Usually the way OAuth works is it does a two-way handshake. So the first piece is you register for an application with the company. They give you a secret and like an authenticator. So it's usually either a token they're going to give you, or sometimes it's your username and passwords. It depends, right? Doesn't matter. They give you some way to create that initial handshake. So when you make the handshake, the next piece they do is they send back a token to you. You take that token and then add your authentication details to it and send it back for another handshake. On that handshake, they send you back an expiry date on that token so that you have the token for a period of time and you store that in your database. And then that's your way to actually make calls to an endpoint. Super complex, probably one of the most annoying things you will ever do, but I can tell you right now, force yourself to do it. Force yourself to learn it before you have to do it at work, because it will likely happen to you. Some of the more annoying APIs, I would say, is Facebook is probably one of the biggest, most pain in the butt APIs, because you can't just get an API key. You have to actually apply for them. You used to be able to just get them publicly. They weren't too bad. Now you have to apply for them and tell them exactly why you want it. Yeah. If you exceed.
The problem is if you're a small business and you want somebody to click on a map to say, I want to go to your shop and figure out.
Oh yeah, you're going to exceed.
You're going to exceed it really freaking quick. So you get 10,000. The thing I figured out for an app I was trying to build was
for a month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing is you use 6. Every time someone clicks on your map, you're using 6 to 12. You're using 6 to 10,000. That adds up really quick. If you're moving around, that's another 6. You do another thing, another 6, another 6. Like, it was ridiculous how quick we counted it to see how quick it was going to add up.
Yeah, that's pretty preposterous. There must be a way to freeze that so that you can stop any other subsequent requests from needing to go out. Part of the problem is when you move the map, instead of it giving you like a pre-cached version of the map in a big area, it makes a request for the next block.
Exactly.
And so that's the silliness. Like if they just gave you a good chunk of the map, then you can just go from there. But I'm almost positive you can download a huge chunk of the map. You'd have to investigate it, but there are alternatives to that as well. You can even roll your own. Some people roll their own Google Map kind of thing. Yep, that's the one. Yep, that's a big one. There's free GeoIP. There's a whole bunch of them out there that are actually completely free and easy to use. And you can kind of get around Google's like 10,000. But like one of the issues we had when I was doing Google Map stuff is we were trying to get time zone data. And Google was the only one that had time zone data that we could actually use. So what we did was we cached it. So we just stored it in the database, and then if somebody was in the same area, we just pull it from there so that we weren't making any more requests.
The person I was helping out, they basically said Google build them, so they just kept going. Google build them $800. And it just purely from that if there's a restaurant, and it was just there where they're located. And
wow.
A month, it was an $800 bill. So they're like, you can figure something out. Like, you don't need not move, you just need basically a big enough map that shows where we're located.
You can lock it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like they
That's really ridiculous. Yeah. All right, so we're not going to do OAuth. I realize that I probably made you all nervous. We're not going to do OAuth. We're going to use something called JWT. So JWT is JSON Web Tokens, and what they are essentially is we log into our backend, and our backend will return a cookie that gets installed on our machine that has a token. That token is a piece of information that's encrypted. So we're going to use the email. The email address will be encrypted. And then any requests we make going forward, we send it our token, and it checks the token for us to make sure that we're actually verified to be doing this. Is this super secure? No, it's not. This is not the 100% securest way to do this, because if anybody hijacked your token, they can now authenticate themselves as you, right? Because it doesn't actually secure it against your session or anything like that. Could you make it more secure? Yes, you definitely could. You could encrypt the session key and actually verify the session key and the email address, which would make it a lot more secure. That being said, the way we're going to implement it, it would actually be very difficult for somebody to do a man-in-the-middle attack anyways. So we should be A-okay. However, we're going to have to rework some stuff, and we need another library. So the first thing we're going to do is install the JSON web token. So we need to install the web token actually in the node application side. So make sure you're in the root of your application. If you do a dir or an ls, you should see the app.js, assets, client, controllers, models, and that will help you know where you are. Okay? So we're not in the client directory, we're one up from the client directory. We're in the root of our node application. Once you're there, you're going to do npm. You can't do yarn in this directory. You can do npm install JSON web token, all one word. And that will install the web token for you. Go ahead and hit enter. It's going to take a couple seconds to come through. And boom, we're there. If you get these high severity warnings, you can run what they suggest. They say run Npm Audit Fix. And sometimes it will fix them, other times it doesn't. I'll run it, see if it actually fixes them. Yeah, fixed 4 of them. So there we go. What they are basically is when they identify a vulnerability inside a package, they'll send a note to the people who publish the package to fix the vulnerability, and they will warn anybody using the package manager that there's a vulnerability in it. If you have your application sitting on GitHub and GitHub finds a vulnerability, they'll send you an email telling you there's a vulnerability in your project and that you need to address it right away. I currently have like 6 vulnerabilities that I haven't fixed. Does it? Yeah, yeah. There's a Lodash one that I need to fix too.
Yeah, that's the one that was.
Oh, yeah. That was just released this week, actually, the Lodash issue. Yeah, okay. So now that we have that, let's jump back over to our actual application and open up the app.js file. So you'll remember that we created a bunch of authentication helpers, and one of the authentication helpers we created was in this application in our app.js file. And we're going to modify that. So if you scroll to wherever it is, mine's on line 52. Oh my God, why do I have all this in here? Why is mine complete? That's super weird. Hold on, I need to check to see if the sessions controller is complete too. No, that's super weird. All right, let me try reopening the app.js. Maybe I just grabbed the wrong one. Oh yeah, you see, it was a weird one. Why is it a weird one? I want answers. I want them now. All right, let's do this one. That was interesting. All right, so it's like line 43. We wrapped it with our authentication helper. So let's talk about this. Where did I have it? So in order for us to be able to connect to our Node server, we're going to authenticate. Unfortunately, our React application doesn't share the session with our Node.js application, which means even though Node is running away in the background, whenever you make a request to it, it's brand new and fresh every single time, which means there's no session data. So it's not like you log in and then it remembers. The unfortunate thing is you log in and you get back your response, and then the next time you want to do another API endpoint thing, you have to log in again, and you would have to do that API endpoint in that same command, because the second you navigate to another page and try to do something else against the server as a separated command, it will actually, you won't get a proper response back. So because of that, we need to be able to authenticate with the server and say, hey, no, we already did this. We already logged in. We're good. Just remember us from this point on. And that's where we're going to use the JWT. It's going to help us tell the server that we've done this, we've logged in, we have a web token, we are good. And so that's what we're looking forward to doing. Okay, so the first piece we're going to do is actually adjust this authentication logic so that we actually have that piece in place. So right top first thing we're going to do is grab our library, the JWT library. To require. Does anybody watch the Goldbergs, the comedy show, the Goldbergs? No, really, nobody. It's really funny. You should watch it. It's really good. It's really funny. think it's on NBC. I want to say NBC. What streaming service is it on? Crave right now. Yeah, it's on Crave. But it's super funny. Anyways, there's like 3 guys and they form a gang and they call it JTP. And that's what I think of every time I see JWP. Anyways, all right. The const is authenticated. It's going to stay the same. We're not changing that. All that piece is the exact same. I don't know why we didn't have a space there. We are going to modify the logic inside it a little bit. So the first piece we're going to modify, we're going to add a new constant called token. And this is basically going to be our check. We're going to check to see if there is a cookie, if there is a body token, if there is a query token, or if we've added it to the headers. So we're going to check 4 locations for our token to exist, which should be able to cover our bases. So it'll cover if we have a cookie set, it will cover if we have sent it with our form data, and it will cover it if we sent it as a query string in the URL. Either way, we have all the locations to check that. So this is just going to be a bunch of OR statements. So it's going to be request.cookies.token or request.body.token or request.query.token or request.headers, and it's a specific header called the X-access token header. Actually, that looks a lot cleaner. Thank you. So like I said, that's going to take a look at the request object, and it's going to see whether or not we have our token defined. The next step, if we find a request session user ID, we're just going to return true. That means if the user is logged in and they're on the API side of it, we're just going to return true. So if request.session.user, capital ID, not the D, just the I, return true. We'll just do that in one statement. And once you've done that, you can go ahead and get rid of that closing return line. If we don't have a token, if no token, we're going to return false, which means they won't be authenticated. Otherwise, we're going to verify our token. So we're going to do jwt.verify, pass it the token, pass it a secret, title your secret however you want. I'm going to call mine Bob the Builder, like it is in our thing. And then a callback function. If we get an error, we're going to return false. Otherwise, we're going to return true. One thing you will notice that I do quite often, I very rarely use else statements. Not sure if you've picked that up. But I very, very, very rarely use else statements. I like definitive statements. Statements that are like, if this, then just do this thing. Especially when I can just return, right? Exit out as soon as possible, make my code super efficient. All right, cool. Anybody still typing? Okay. By the way, the order of these is important. Leave the order the way it is because they're ordered by priority. Hi, Mo.
Hi.
All right. Still typing? Yeah, it is in the lesson plan, yeah. All right. You're interrupting. People are going to think I've been shot. All right. Let's scroll down to where it says app use, just underneath there. We're just doing a small change in here. Basically, we don't use the flash in here. We're going to wind up writing a notifier in React. So we don't need the backend notifier anymore. And we don't want to redirect because there's no place to redirect it, right? So in here, all we're going to basically do is if is authenticated request, we're just going to return false. So if they're not authenticated, we're going to return false. Otherwise, return true. If you like if-else statements, you may write if-else statements. They'll never deduct marks for that. Just, I don't know. I kind of like this definitive coding too. I'll scroll down just a little bit so that maybe Ali can grab the rest of those pieces that she was missing. Now this is only one part of what we need. We're also going to have to update our sessions controller where we had the authentication logic in there so that we can incorporate this JWT in there. Okay. Anybody still typing? Okay. Let me know when you're done there, and then I'll move on. The rest of you go ahead and open up the sessions controller. Done? All right, cool. Me, sessions controller, bam. Now, a couple of things we're going to do here. We no longer need view logic whatsoever in the Node application. So this exports.login, say goodbye, sayonara. Goodbye. So I'll do that again because not everybody saw. This block that I've highlighted here, we're going to delete it. Because we don't need anything that just purely renders a view. Don't just go and delete every view controller action because some of them don't just render views. Some of them actually return back blog model data, right? We're going to just reconfigure those so they still return back blog model data. All right, so we're going to delete that login thing. I can't quite fit this in one window. I could if I expanded it. There we go. There, it's all in one window. Cool. Okay. So first thing we're going to need to do is import our JWT. So let's do that. So const JWT equals require JSON web token. The author find one stays the way it is. The then author all stays the way it is. This error stays the way it is. If is match stays the way it is, and right to line 13 stays the way it is. It's really this logic right here that's going to change. So we no longer need the flash because that's a view-centric thing, and we don't need to do a redirect because, again, that's a view-centric thing. So instead, let's write in our const token equals JWT. This is us creating a token. We're going to create a token. So if you remember what Authenticate does, the user logs in, their login details hits Authenticate. Authenticate checks it against the model to see if there's a match. That still is happening. If it matches, we're going to create a JWT token, assign it as a cookie, and give it back to the user. So they will now have a token basically saying, you're logged in, you're A-OK, you can continue with your blog stuff. All right? So this is the part where we actually create the token. The first argument we need is an object. The second argument we need is a string. And then the third argument we're going to need is an object as well. So just type those in like that. It's a little easier to type in when you see them like that. Scroll up a little bit. Okay. In the middle one, whatever you chose as your secret in app needs to be your secret here as well. Mine was Bob the Builder. I don't know what yours was. In the first object, we need to give a payload. So we're going to type in payload. And the payload is going to be whatever we're going to encrypt. We're going to encrypt the body.email address. I'm getting that from up here. It's what gets passed through the request. And my IDE is nicely separated these across 3 lines for you. So it's a little easier to see. In the last object, we're actually going to set the expiry date of our token. This is how long that token's going to live before it completely gets removed and the user needs to sign in or re-authenticate again. And we're going to set it for 1 hour. They get an hour to write their blog and then they have to log back in again. They'll probably likely hate us for that. What? Okay. Things doing things. Hold on, I'll fix it. Sorry. Well, I'll fix it to the best of my ability because it's being stupid. There. I'll let you type that out so you can see it a little better. And then I'll save it once you're done. What will happen here is the JWT library will encrypt this request.body.email. It will encrypt it using Bob the Builder as a salt hash, or as a salt key, sorry, and it will set an expiry date of 1 hour. It's going to return back that token to us. The next step for us is to take that token and actually assign it as a cookie. So in order to do that, we have to, on the next line, set a response. So the first part of our response will be .cookie. Who doesn't like cookies? The cookie is going to have a key of token and a value of token. And it's going to be only transferable by HTTP only. This means that it can't be set using anything other than an HTTP request. So if somebody tries to write it using SCP, FTP, or any other type of protocol that isn't HTTP, it will not work. Okay. And here we will be using an else statement. Again, this is all view-centric logic. This request.flash, this res.redirect. Let's change those to just respond in JSON for us. We're going to give it an object to encrypt, or to encode. Your credentials do not match. And then in the catch down here at the bottom, same thing, we're going to do res.json, except for we're just going to return a raw error. So now whenever we make a request from React over, so once we've authenticated and we have our cookie, every request we make from React to the backend now will contain that cookie. Node is going to check that cookie in app.js and make sure that we are authenticated with the application. It's going to use the Bob the Builder salt key to make sure that we actually were encrypted using that key. If you wanted to lock it down even more so, you could use your session ID as the salt key, which means it would be random every single time. That would be very hard to crack. You could use the date. Sometimes people use the date within an hour period. That way it always authenticates within that hour and then just dies after the hour. There's a bunch of different ways you could do it. All right, cool. Cool. We did that part. Nice. All right. Anybody still writing? No? Awesome. Now we're going to modify our blogs controller while we're back here. Blogs controller. This isn't, some of this is based on authentication. We are going to change some of our authentication. Why don't we do that part first? So instead of request is authenticated, we're going to rewrite this slightly different. We're going to say if not request, not authenticated, like that. Then go ahead and return our response with a status code of 404 and send this error. Not authenticated. Not authenticated. And it's not a 404, actually. It's a 401. And then once you've written that, copy it. Because we're going to go replace all the other ones with it. Also, remove this weird mongoose requirement at the top. I don't know why it's there. I must have added it accidentally at some point. This response, by the way, is the same one that we've been doing .render on up to this point. Now you get to see the other little methods that we have available to it. We have status available to it where you can actually set an HTTP status code, which is cool. So you could like force the 200, force the 301 redirect, whatever status code you decide you want to type in there, you are welcome to type in there. 401 means not authenticated. Then we can send an error message as well. So we're sending this error of not authenticated. What will happen is if the user is not authenticated and they attempt to do a transaction against the node server, it's actually going to return an error back into their console of not authenticated. Actually, it just gives an error. They have to look at the network tab to see that they're not authenticated. All right, so now that you've copied that, go ahead and copy that. And anywhere it says request is authenticated needs to be replaced with that logic. So that will be all of them. And actually, that's not 100% true. We're going to remove that from 2 of them. Sure. We want to make 2 views, like 2 pieces of logic completely public because it doesn't make sense for them to not be public. Does anybody know what 2 places we want to make public? Like what 2 actions should be public? Index and show. So we have a couple of things that we need to actually modify. One, in index, we're going to remove this is authenticated logic because we don't want to authenticate it. There's no reason to, because it's public. And 2, this find that we have here with this clause, remove the clause. So it is just a straight up empty find. That will return back all of the blogs and will still populate author in them. But that way, at least then we're not restricting it to a signed in user, right? You have a question, Tanner, or are you just fixing your arm? Okay. What's funny? Who's getting error codes? No, what's the 482? Oh, I did know that. Yes. No, I did find that out recently. Yeah. I didn't know that for quite a while. I just found that out in the last few months. All right, and then in the show, kind of the same idea. Go ahead and get rid of that request and just remove the author parameter from the find. So leave the ID in there because we still need to find that specific one, but we don't need it based on the author. We don't care anymore about the author. Well, we care, but no, we don't care. We don't give a damn. Screw that guy. We should populate the author into it. I mean, it's literally one line of code. Yeah, let's populate the author. That way we have them. We can give credit where credit is due. Populate author. My wife, for the last 4 years, has been writing for BDO Canada. She wrote for their insolvency blogs. So she's been writing for them for like freaking ever. And then they just brought all of their blogs in-house. So now she's writing for BDO. And every month they just give her a whole whack of different things, right? So she's written for a concrete company, for a networking company. She's done 2 networking companies, a security company, and she's starting to write for a cannabis company. And so it's kind of interesting because she has to become the professional, like the most knowledgeable expert on all of these. But it doesn't matter because you can't find any of these blogs because none of them are under her name. Not a one. She just ghost writes them all. So it doesn't matter that you have author because it might not even be you anyways. It'll be underneath some other person. But she's written almost 1,000 blogs and not one of them has her name. Which is kind of sad, I guess, but I guess it's pretty normal. It's pretty common. All right, so that gives us, hold on. Does that give us everything we need? Yeah, that gives us everything we need. So we have 2 completely public views. Both of them will populate the author inside of them, which is awesome. We do have a couple of things that we need to get rid of. So anything that is view-centric, we need to get rid of because we're in API only. That's what we're switching to is API only. Our view is our JSON response. That's our view, okay? So render needs to die in a fire, and so does flash and redirect. They're done. We're done with those. We're not going to do those anymore. So let's go ahead. This is where everything starts to really clean up and get nice and small. Put your cursor on line 11 between the curly brace and that parenthesis. And then drag up to the other curly brace beside blogs. And then find your delete key on your keyboard and hit delete. And then literally type in res.json, set of parentheses, and the word blogs. That's your view logic. That will take the blogs response from Mongo, which is already a JavaScript object, right? And it will transfer it to the front end in that format for us, which is super cool. Same with the catch. Copy that all the way up to the top. res.status 404.json error. API logic, super small. Much nicer. Under show, we're going to do kind of the same thing. Go from the curly brace right up to the top. Res.json blog. And with the error, same deal. Res.status 404.json error. For the drafts and the published, you can go ahead and remove those entirely. And the new. So you're going to delete 3 actions. New, published, and drafts. Just delete them right out of there altogether. Under show blog and under index blogs. Yeah. Or blurgs. Oh my god, it's a blurg. I deleted publish, draft, and new because we're going to use list.js. Have you used list.js before, Tina? No? Has anybody used list.js in this class? No? It's a very common library for doing filtering and sorting and stuff like that, and it does it in line with your stuff, and it services React so well. It just makes sense. There's no reason for us to have back-end logic like that anymore. All right, the create function, most of it will stay pretty much the way you see. Just this logic here needs to change. So right now we have a request flash and a request redirect. Instead, we're going to send back a res.status. Anybody know what the status is going to be? Status number? Yep, 200. And the send will be success, blog created. And then the error will be literally the same thing we've been sending already. Res.status 401.send error. Actually, we'll just send the error back the way it is. Now the edit is a view, but we have to keep it around because we have to be able to respond with the current details of whatever that blog has and send that to the front end with React. So the only pieces we're going to change inside the edit is the fact that we're responding with a blog. Sorry, res.send blog. And I didn't delete enough things. Can I scroll down, or are people still copying the top one? No? Okay, I'm going to scroll down a little bit. And then the error, same thing as we've been doing. Res.status 404.send error. Oh, that one under create should be a 404, not a 401. It doesn't really matter. Both are errors. They mean different things. So as you can see, we're slowly getting rid of all of the view logic entirely. So we don't need it around anymore. My sandals. We'll get rid of all the view logic, and all we need now is JSON responses. And the JSON responses will be our view logic, essentially. All right? No more pug, no more HTML. Still typing? Nope, good. Anybody still typing? No? Cool. Let's go do the same thing with update. Yes, I realize all this is fairly tedious. I apologize for that. Update basically stays the way it is. It's just the view-centric logic that needs to change out, right? Res.json, or sorry, res.status 200.send success blog updated successfully. And then this guy down here is a res.status 404, whoops, .send, and the error message. And And then last but not least, we got to fix that destroy one. That's the last one in this list. Under the destroy, same thing. Res.status. I actually don't think 200 is the correct one. I think it's actually something different. Oh, no. Success. Don't send errors. Blog deleted successfully. And then just send the error back. That's it. That's all of them. And then the cool thing in the authors controller, we only actually have to edit one in the authors controller, which is kind of nice. But we do have to delete something out of the authors controller as well, because we have a view with that we might as well get rid of. What time is it? 6:35. We're actually not doing too bad today. Like, we're actually kind of ahead of schedule, which is nice, and might actually get this whole lesson plan right through. No promises. All right, anybody still typing? No? Nice. Let's open up the authors controller. And go ahead and delete new entirely. Goodbye, new. And then with the create, all this wonderful logic. Goodbye, logic. Res.status 200.send success author created successfully. Get rid of all this. Res.status 404.send there. And that's a public method anyways. We allow users to be created. Anybody can create a new author, so that's completely public. And then I think that's a good place to stop and take a small break before we actually get into the React side and start building out our React front-end components. We'll take 15 minutes just because we're a bit ahead schedule. Let me see what we've got. Yeah, we've got enough to actually carry us a little bit into the next class too. What we'll do is we'll write the method to actually show all the blogs. Out of curiosity, do you guys all have at least one blog kicking around? Maybe not. Because we did create one. Like an ASDF thing, but we did create an example blog in our servers. I'm pretty sure we do. Yeah. Not a big deal if we don't, but it's fine. We'll set up the index to actually view it. Or maybe we'll do the create first then, so we can actually create a blog. That makes more sense. Let's take a break. That's what I want to do. I want to take a break. All right, I'll pause. You'll notice that if you attempt to run the node application, it will not work. And the reason is because we still have routes. And you can actually see that if you look at the error message that it produces. So the error message that's up here is route.get requires a callback function but got an object undefined instead. And that's because this is under, which one did it happen under? It's likely under the blog routes, I'm guessing. Yeah, no, where did I just see that? I hate it when it's all mashed together like this. It makes it hard to find where the actual problem is. Okay, so it's under the routes thing. So I'll show you where that is. So that will be under our routes that we defined in here, in our actual routes.js at the root of our node application. So there's a few things we want to remove. One, we don't need this pages routes anymore because we're not navigating to any views. So go ahead and remove that entirely and save that. And make sure you get rid of the app.use that points to the page routes. And let's change registering our page routes to just registering our routes. And importing the routes. There we go. That's a little bit more generic. So now, once we've done that, we have to actually open up our routes folder where we actually define each of the resource routes and modify those. If you open up the routes folder, you can actually delete the pages.js file that's under there because we don't need it anymore. Goodbye, pages.js. I'm not going to delete the views folder. The only reason I'm not is because you can use it as a reference point going forward. It's up to you unless you want to back up your application and then look at it. I'm not going to remove any of the branches online anyway, so they'll always be there for you if you just need reference. But you can leave it there. It's just never going to get contacted. Like nothing's ever going to touch it. All right, so once you've removed those two pieces, go ahead and let's start in blogs.js. We need to remove published, drafts, and new because those routes are no longer. So now you should only have the index show, edit, create, update, and destroy. Should be the only ones you have. You should have 6 altogether. 3 gets and 3 posts. Okay. If we jump over to the authors, so routes/authors.js, only one needs to be deleted there, and that's just the new. And then go ahead and save that. And then last but not least, under /routes sessions.js, you're only getting rid of the login. And then save that. So basically, you're getting rid of any views that are 100% view-centric with no blog connection or no resource connection, right? Minus publish and draft, because we're going to handle that on the front end instead. So now that we've got rid of all of that, my server should be working. Yep, everything's working. And we are ready to start utilizing our actual React application. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to run this. Command K, Control C, Command K. I have split my terminal into 2 windows. I have no idea how you do that in Command Prompt or PowerShell. You may have to open up 2 PowerShells or 2 command prompts. The reason being is we have to actually run 2 servers concurrently. That means at the same time. We have to run the Node server to handle all of our API requests, and we have to run the React server in order to handle our React front-end views. Once we've built all this and deployed to Heroku, Heroku will only ever run 1 server. And that's because when React builds, it actually returns back a JavaScript file that can just be executed in the browser natively. But until that point, we need to be able to run these as separated servers at the same time. Generally, you start your Node server first because the React server is going to proxy everything to the Node server, meaning the Node server has to be in existence, right? So in one of your PowerShells or your command prompts or terminal if you're using a Mac, you're going to navigate to your blog, just to the root folder, right where the Node app is, and you're going to type in either npm start or no daemon, depending on whether or not you have no daemon working. If everything is golden, it should start up, say listening on 4000, and there should be no current issues. Knock on wood. So if you're getting a Mongo error, likely you downloaded my application, right? The reason why you're getting that error is because under my.env, which I'm not going to navigate to publicly, under my.env, I have username and password. Under your .env, you likely have a different set of variable names. So under app.js, under the Mongo, you need to change these 2 values. So under your .env, right, you'll have a username and password in there. I don't know what your variable names are, but you need to make sure they match with app.js variable names. Did it work? It probably didn't because you're on Windows. So Windows, unfortunately, the environment variable username is taken by the Windows operating system. So you may have to rename that. Oh, is it DB underscore?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well then you're fine. You're on a Mac, you're fine. It doesn't seem to overwrite it. Let me see.
So this is always the syntax error whenever that comes up. And what's the syntax error? You see those underscore
Oh, yeah, it's under
underscore pods. If you go to your .env, or have DB underscore username, your .env.
Oh.
So just change that to DB underscore username and DB underscore password, and then you should be fine. That's all I think.
Here's DB underscore password.
Username and password. Because that's within my ENV. But everything you've got ENV, that's what you need. You understand how that works, right, Olga?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Okay.
It works. Let's see it.
I didn't see that at first. Is that what I know?
Are you sure you're under the correct directory?
Ended up inside this app.js. Sure. I was in compliance.
One thing I will say double check if you're actually because okay, so this is saying app.js like but you don't have a so it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So what I'm guessing is that it's not the tables are like stuff. Oh, yeah. No. Oh, maybe it's the
Because in the last question, it says you use the paste command and the file
paste or fix?
paste, like copy and paste.
Oh, no, yeah.
Which I'm able to find it so that way you can delete two files and mix them together, but not to also add a new thing. So the code that you put in
Now
the
press
way
that.
you have
The way that you would have to do that is take the two files and take it to a new.
I did to
Alright, let's handle this out.
Okay.
We've done it hourly in assignment 3 or 4.
Ah, okay.
Is that the app.js file I sent you?
Yes.
You know what I bet you it is? It might be a character, a Mac character somewhere. Is Bethany on a Mac or on a PC? Is anybody on a PC that can send their app.js file over to Ali? Okay. Replace the contents with the contents that he sends you because it might be some weird, bizarre character difference. Doesn't make really a lot of sense, but it might be. All right. Cool. So we are going to actually set up React side so that we can actually view all the blogs. But before we do that, we're going to need to run 2 servers. So right now I've got my Node server running. The next server I need to run is the client side. So make sure, I'm just going to back out, you cd into client. Okay? And then from there, you're going to run either yarn start if you have yarn, or npm start if you have npm. I have yarn, so I'm going to run yarn start. And it should open your browser into that particular application. We'll go back to the server. And actually, I think I said we're going to create the blog first. So we'll do that first. All right. Just out of curiosity, anybody not have 2 servers running? No? Everybody's good? You don't have 2 servers running? In the Node one? What's the error that you've got in the Node one? It's coming from bcrypt? Try reinstalling bcrypt just in case that's the issue. Oh, does it give you an error and tell you it can't install?
Yes.
Because you have no permission errors?
Not true. Try installing. Is there a way to look out and stop the government? Just run that possible issue and then sort of
Hmm? Is that like Certus? And
yeah, insurance. Yeah.
yeah, not for long though. They charge way too much money.
What's your insurance?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
Social insurance number and all.
Is it pre-JIP like this? Pre-JIP? I think it is. Oh, install bcrypt.js and uninstall the original bcrypt. Are you on Slack? One second, guys. All right. With the bcrypt.js, it gives you a new. Uninstall the original bcrypt first, and then try to install the bcrypt.js. All right, for the rest of you, you should hopefully have these two servers running. Even if you can't get the two servers running, let's see if we can get the React stuff in, and then we can solve that at the end of class. What's up? Is that better? All right. Okay, so under all this stuff we're going to be doing is under the client, so it's up to you. If you want to open just the client folder, I'm totally cool with that, because you're not going to be doing anything in the back end going forward here. I'm going to close all those files off. All right, so the thing we're going to do first is we're going to create a blogs piece. And there's a bunch of different ways you can actually manage your files. There are some very strong opinions about how to manage files in React. The way I'm managing them, though, is I'm putting them under their resource dependency. So because it's a blog, I'm going to put it under a folder called blogs, and that's where I'm going to put all those components for the blogs under components. So source, components, blogs. And underneath there, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it new.js. And that's going to be my new component. So in order to create a blog, any component, we require 3 pieces. Does anybody remember what 3 pieces we need to create any component? What's the library we need? We only say it about 150 times. Starts with an R. There we go. Import React from React. The second piece we need is the actual component itself. You can either do it as a class component or a functional component. I'm going to use functional components because we're going to use hooks to manage things like state and lifecycle. And we'll talk about that in depth in a moment. So I'm going to call it function, new with a capital N, like that. And then last but not least, we have to export our component. Export, default, new. Those 3 pieces are required for every component you create. You have to have those 3 pieces if you want it to be a component. You need to import React. You need to have a function or a class component stated, and then you need to export it. Now you can get away with exporting it on one line, like we could run export default function new, and that would totally be okay. You can also use arrow functions, by the way. You don't have to necessarily use the old vanilla type of function. So if you want to write it with an arrow function, you can do that as well. Cool. There's a few things that we want to control in our application. One, we want to be able to actually manage something called state. And the reason we want to be able to manage state in this particular component is because we're not going to read the form every single time it gets modified by the user. That's not the way React works. React does things reactively, which means when an interaction happens by the user, React should immediately respond to that. And it does that by using event binding to whatever the interaction is that the user is going to do. So instead of taking the form when a user submits and then parsing through all the inputs, instead, as the user types something into an input, we're going to store that information into something called state. What state allows us to do is, as the user makes a modification interactively to our application, state will modify anything referencing itself. So if we update state anywhere throughout our application that is, well, within that component, that is referencing state will immediately change, which is super, super cool. And it allows for this nice interactivity without you having to really understand event binding. So we need state. Now the difference between state in a functional component and a class component is purely syntax. In a functional component, we would create a constructor, define the state object, and what it looks like. With a functional component, we have to use something called hooks. In order to use hooks, we have to tell React that we want to actually use the hook module. So we're going to import the React library and a specific module called useState. And this is a React hook module. Hooks can only be used in functional components. They are inaccessible in class components. Okay? That is just how it works. You can't use these in a class component, nor do you need to. In a class component, you have the full lifecycle methods that are available to you that you inherit from the React component. You also have the state object, and you also have a props object that both come from the React component. With functional functional components, we have to actually give it everything it's going to need. So we're going to use state, and then why don't we define some state objects inside here? Well, we're going to define two. The first one we're going to define is called inputs. Okay? That's the name of our state. So anywhere we want to actually reference it, we just reference inputs. So just like you would reference any variable. The second piece we need in here is the updater function, which is just the name for it. We're going to call it setInputs. That's the name of our updater function. So when we want to update inputs, we don't do inputs equals. We never do that. We call setInputs and give it the argument. And then that ensures, React will ensure that that will dynamically update any reference to inputs so that you should see it immediately happen, not on a page refresh or anything like that. Okay? We make that equal to the useState method. useState takes one argument, and that argument is its set current initiating state, so it's initialized state. Inputs is actually going to be an object that contains all three of our input fields that we're going to have in here. You might remember blogs has title, content, and status, right? So we want to make sure we can capture all three of those input fields. So in order to do that, we're going to give it an empty object. That'll be our starting point. Let's create one more state object for ourselves. We need a way to be able to tell React that we're done and we want to redirect to another location. So once our user has submitted their form and they created the new blog post, we want to redirect to the blog's index page. And we can't do that without the redirect capability. So we're going to add a state object, and we're going to call it redirect. We're going to give it its redirect updater, or its state updater called setRedirect. It's going to use state, and it's going to start with the initial value of false, not flash, false. React Router gives us this module called redirect, and it allows us to be able to create redirects. They're soft redirects, right? An actual redirect returns back a response of 301 and will actually take your request and proxy it off to the new location that it needs to go to. That's how redirects generally work. The soft redirect that React Router gives us basically will just render the new component and pass whatever details need to go to it to that component. So it's a soft redirect. It won't actually return back a 301. So let's make sure we put the redirect method in place. So we're going to import a new piece. We're going to import the redirect module from React Router. In order to facilitate updating our information as the user enters new information into the inputs, we need to be able to bind an event listener. Some way to be able to say, when this thing occurs, go ahead and update our state for us. We're not going to actually cause the update state inside of our inputs. We're going to do it instead through another method, and this is very common in React. We're going to have a method that's called handle input change. So we're going to create that. This is probably the first time you've seen a function created inside a function. What this will do is actually scope this function to that function, so it's inaccessible outside of the function. Do you think I can say function at least one more time? There you go. Has anybody ever watched Super Troopers before? Seen the meow thing? That's what it reminds me of, yeah. So in addition to being able to handle input changes, function. In addition to being able to handle input changes, we also need to be able to handle the form submission. The reason being is it's the internet and it's HTML. And HTML has like some predefined things that they do. When you click submit, it's like, cool, I'm going to take a look at the action that you're doing and I'm going to send the form off to that action. That's how it works, right? Same with like when you click on an anchored link, right? It goes to where you told it to go to. That's how it works. We want to stop it from doing that. So in order to do that, we'll need a function that will allow us to stop it. So we're going to call it handle submit. Give it the event. And we're off to the races. 2 more pieces. We want to check to see if redirect is true, because if it's true, we're going to redirect. Very simple. We just reference the state variable, right? Redirect. So if redirect, return the redirect component. Takes one property called to, and you literally just point it to where you want it to go. We're going to point it to blogs, and that's a self-closing component. And incidentally, we can be super lazy here. We don't need to wrap this in a set of curly braces at all. That should work. Except for that semicolon might blow it up. It's not freaking out. Of course, it's not attached to anything. Let's just, to be safe, wrap it in a set of parentheses. No, it took them out. So the linter took them out, so it must not be necessary. We'll find out soon enough. And then the last thing we need to do with our components, and I think I told you guys this, all components have to what? At the very minimum, they have to do this one thing. They have to return. They have no choice. They have to return. So we're going to return an empty set of parentheses, which it does not like. It is mad about that. Now, it might seem silly because our React is technically a part of our application. Why would we need to use something like fetch, right? Do you guys remember fetch? How many of you remember fetch? Yeah, it was kind of like the last thing we did in the JavaScript semester. And Bethany, you didn't even take JavaScript, did you? Okay. So fetch allows us to actually reach out to the wonderful world of the internets and actually make HTTP requests and pull back data from an endpoint, right? So I can reach out to google.com and literally pull that whole DOM structure back using fetch, right? So we're not going to use fetch because fetch has this annoying thing where you have to resolve these 2 promises in order to get back the actual data you need. We're going to use a much easier library known as Axios. And it's very common, very popular, and very simple to use. But Axios is going to do the same thing. It's going to allow us to reach across the internet, grab our data, and bring it back. Of course, we're not actually reaching across the internets. We're reaching across the internet because we're local to our node server, so it's not really that far to go, right? But we still have to do it the same way. The other important piece about Axios, in order to get React to respond properly to using the proxy to actually proxy off our requests, they have to be done through actual XHR requests. So that means we have to actually make a JavaScript request for the data to pull it back using AJAX, essentially. I'm oversimplifying it, but we'll say AJAX. So that means we have to use something either like fetch or Axios to get it to work. So we're going to use Axios, simple library to learn, very easy to use, definitely much more favorable than fetch. Before we do that, though, we kind of got to install it. So let's jump over to our wonderful browser, or to our terminal, kill that React app, because that's where we're going to be installing it. If you put a set of quotes in there, I think it will return it as a raw text node. I could be wrong. It might blow up. Yeah, it might blow up. You could put in just a BR tag. That would totally be acceptable too. Okay, so we're going to install. You can either use yarn add to do the installation or npm install. Either way, the thing you're installing is Axios. A-X-I-O-S. I think that would make an awesome kid's name, Axios. What's that? Kid number 8, Axios. All right, it's installed. Woo, yes. Let's go ahead and boot this thing up. Yarn start. Hopefully things don't go kablooey. Nope, looks like everything's still cool. Now we need to import it. Let's import. I like to capitalize it. I don't know why. Axios. Depending on who you see, some people capitalize it, some people don't. Totally up to you. Call it Bob if you want to. It doesn't really matter. Call it get shit from the internet. I don't care. All right, so we have Axios. Now we actually need to implement. Why do I always do these in weird orders? It does not make sense that I do these in these weird orders. Yeah, we're going to write our actual form first, and then we'll deal with handling change and submit. It's not like that in the lesson notes, but that's how we're going to do it, because that makes the most amount of sense. So go ahead and put your cursor in this return, and hit enter. And we are literally going to get this component done, and then no other ones. All right, so we're going to create a new div. And I'm not sure if I told you guys this, but we can't use class, like a CSS-style class, because class is a keyword. So we have to use class name equals, and we're going to call it container. And don't worry, this is the only one we are ever going to type all the way out. Every other one we will copy and paste. Because I don't like typing all this stuff out. All right, we're going to create a header. Ladies, no, I'm kidding. Write an H1, new blog. It's just HTML. So absolutely easy, right? Actually, I'm going to call it new blog post. New div, and this one's empty. And here's where we start to get into things you haven't seen before. All right, we're going to create a form. So let's just create it empty for now. Okay. Forms take, by default, no properties, right? An empty form will actually it will get back to itself. So instead of using the HTTP method post, it will use get, and it will actually send whatever data you send it. When you hit submit, it will put it up in the URL and send it back to itself. That's how forms work when you don't give them attributes. But we're going to give it 2 attributes. We're going to give it an action so it knows where to actually post to. And we're going to post to API blogs. So we're definitely targeting our node server. Next, because I don't want to use the HTTP method get, I want to use post. we're going to say method equals post, so that it posts our data and not using the query parameters. Sometimes you want it to. Sometimes you want get. So I don't know why it's the default, because most people use posts and get. And then last but not least is a JavaScript event call that we're going to do, which is called onSubmit. And this is important that you write it this way. It's on with a capital S, submit equals. And it's not quotes that we're going to use. It's inline JavaScript we're going to use. So it's a set of curly braces. And that signifies that the thing inside is a JavaScript expression, which can be a little confusing because we're already in a JavaScript file. But it's because you're now in HTML, you need to escape again to get back into JavaScript. So does anybody know what I'm going to type in here? Anybody want to guess? Handle, submit. Which makes sense, right? Oh, don't do what it just did. It self-closes on me if it doesn't detect any logic inside. What did I say? So basically what's going to happen is when we submit our form, it's going to call that callback, right? Basically what we did is we said onSubmit is equal to this function definition, right? It's not a function call. If it was a function call, it would have a set of parentheses beside handle submit. It's a function definition. So it's going to call the function definition that we defined. So when somebody clicks that submit button, it's going to call that function, okay? Next, we need to add in our form pieces. So we're going to do a div with a class name equal to form group. Don't worry, there will be copying and pasting in our future. We're going to give it a label. This label is called title. Going to give it an input. Nope. Inputs are self-closing. Stupid React. Input's going to have a class name. With a capital N equal to form control. These class names that we're giving are coming from Bootstrap, by the way. That's what makes them look nice and pretty. I'm going to give it a name of title. I'm going to say this thing is required. Actually, we just need to leave required by itself. And then, last but not least, I'm going to set its onChange event. So let's see if you can guess what this one is going to be equal to. What will our onChange event be equal to? Close. Handle input change. There we go. And when I save, it splits them all across for some stupid reason. Leave it in one line. At G-Shift, me and this other guy were working on these Google scrapers, but he's part-time. So he's only in like 2 days a week. So I've been working on them, and I've got this stupid linter. And every time I create a function with a set of parameters in it, it takes the parameters, it puts the two parentheses on separate lines, and it lists the parameters like this. So every time he makes a file, my stupid linter drops them all, and now he's got a new change on his Git. And we keep winding up with all these stupid conflicts because of my linter. So I just deleted it. I got rid of the linter being passed. Anyways, let's go ahead and duplicate. D, because we're going to need 3 of them all together. The onChange event is the same for all 3 inputs. It's not going to change it, ironically. It's not going to change for the 3 components. All right, so under the second one, it's going to be content, and the name will be content. And under the third one, it will be status, and this needs to actually change into a select box. So let's change from input to select. Most of it stays the same though. Yep, all stays the same, except for it's not a self-closing tag. And this would be select here. And then it's going to take the option with the value equal to draft, with the lowercase word draft. And then the second one will be published, with a lowercase published. Yep, definitely we are. That needs to be status. Thank you. Nice catch. And then last but not least, we need our button to actually submit. It's just div class name equals form group. And it's going to have a button in it with the class name of button dark. Type is going to be equal to submit. You have to do that, otherwise it won't submit. You can use an input called submit, but I don't know. I like the button. Actually, so does React. React is not like inputs that are not going to have like an input being put into them by the user. It would prefer you use a button. It also doesn't like anchor links that point to hashtags. It gets mad and tells you it doesn't like it. And that is it. That is that whole form. 742. Yeah. I think we might call it, just because the next piece is a little bit in depth. So once this form is done, I think we'll call it quits. And I will help those who have applications that are not working at all. Everything should still work in theory. It might warn us that we're using Axios, but haven't actually registered it against anything. That's the only thing I can see it warning, but it should be a warning, not an error. But I should be able to help everybody after this. All right. I'm going to stop because people don't need to watch us type.